So I've been talking about this mastermind I've been in for the last 90 days on social media and here on the podcast with my coach and my mentor, half my age, Brandon T. Adams. And he's been introducing me to some really incredible people. So he gave me an assignment to do some research on one of our next guests. And it was another, just fabulously successful person. And I was kind of dubious about the research. Then I started researching this gentleman and I fell in love, and I spent hours and hours with his videos, with his writings. I get choked up even talking about it. We were talking before I turned on the camera, what meeting Jeff Hoffman has meant to me. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's the founder and CEO of Priceline and a bunch of other brands that you know. He's world famous. He's successful. He's rich. Every biography of him starts with his net worth. But that's not what's most interesting to me about Jeff Hoffman. It's his heart. It's who he is. It's his creativity. It's what he's doing with his life now, what he's decided to do and impact the world. One of the things that I learned from Jeff is that the entrepreneurship and the qualities of it are the way to build a life. That was a new way for me of thinking of entrepreneurship, because being a coach, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. And now I understand it. And I understand why Jeff would fly around the world to talk to underserved communities all around the world to help them help themselves. So we're going to talk a little to Jeff about life. Jeff, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate what you said, man. People like you make it all worth it. I spent a lot of time traveling and trying to teach and share, but when I hear comments like that, it makes it all worth it.
Often when someone's a little bit out of my depth, I get a little nervous because I'm a little overwhelmed by maybe, the resume. This time I'm overwhelmed a little bit just because what we talked about before the camera came on of I'm really inspired by you and who you are. And when I got a chance to ask you questions in the mastermind, I asked you, how did you become this Jeff Hoffman? How are you so balanced and open-hearted, and your value system seems to have shifted from rocking the world of business, and you did movies, you did business, you did entertainment, all that stuff, to now what you're doing now?
And, I think that has everything to do with the people you spend your time with. I have a weird mix in my life, to be honest, because there are days where, because of what I do, for example, my role as the chairman of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, where we're helping people get free, obtain economic freedom by starting businesses. And we're on the ground in 190 countries. And in that role, I literally meet with presidents and prime ministers and sometimes kings and queens. So you have one side of life that is almost, comically surreal, sitting in a palace somewhere. And then that goes all the way to the other end, where I'm, sitting on the banks of the Mekong River in Cambodia in the dirt, with a bunch of kids who've never had electricity or running water, and all their parents were killed in Cambodia's civil war. They're just raising themselves. Those extremes really keep you grounded. I think that if you lived always within the same bubble, and if your bubble was one that was high-end people, for example, today my business partner is Pitbull, the singer. His world, being an international superstar like Pitbull, is filled with hanging with friends of his, Jennifer Lopez and people like that. If you only stayed in one world, I think you'd get kind of a jaded view. But because I spend a lot of time in inner cities in the US with kids, or in developing countries, in villages, it just really helps me keep perspective, and it really helps me keep grounded.
When you left corporate life, one of the things you said was, if I want to be a different person, I have to hang out with people who are different than me. And you went and traveled the world.
Yeah, that was a very specific goal that I learned way back in like 7th grade. And it was a quote from one of my favorite authors, Mark Twain. It was in the cover of a book. And I'm paraphrasing, but Mark Twain said, "Travel is the fatal enemy of prejudice." And since like 7th grade, I couldn't get that out of my gut, thinking about what did he mean? What did he mean? And what he meant was that, prejudice comes from ignorance, which comes from not understanding, which comes from never taking the time to actually get to know people, but just judging them by what they look like, I guess, whether they're, gender biased or racial bias or ethnic bias or religious. And so what Mark Twain was telling me, because by the way, Mark, I was sure that he only wrote that in my book because he knew I was going to read it, even though he's long dead, was that, for me to evolve, I didn't know any of those words then, but I did know that for me to become the kind of person I dreamed of being one day, I was going to have to get out. And I was going to have to spend time getting to know all kinds of different people in the world, not just the ones near me that looked like me. And that influenced me heavily, which is why I wound up really getting into the travel industry, because I certainly didn't have any money to travel with. So I realized, and this is the entrepreneurship part, where entrepreneurship, first of all, entrepreneurship is not a job, it's a mindset. And it's the mindset of self-determination. It's the mindset of saying, for me, growing up with a single mom with 4 kids, I can't afford to travel now, but I'm going to design, instead of just accepting the life you have, why don't you design the one you wish you had? And that's what entrepreneurs do. They design the future. So that's how I wound up getting involved in the travel industry and starting travel companies, because guess what? I wanted to travel and no one was going to do that for me. I had to figure out a way to make that happen myself. And that's what entrepreneurship's about. It's about designing your future and designing a better future for people around you.
So what did you learn when you traveled the world? Without the title, when you traveled the world in a different role?
So part of, I had, a little personal goal. And the personal goal was to break bread with as many families as I could in their home. So at every country, I was trying to figure out some way to get away from the officials, get away from the business people, get away from the tourist area, and see if there's any way I could get invited into a home or invite myself to eat dinner with a family. And that was the way that I was really going to see what people are really like, not in tourist mode or anything else, how people live. So that worked. And answer your question, what I learned was that in the end, we really are all just the same. Everybody's just trying to get along. Everybody's trying to raise their kids, do the best they can, have a good life, find love, find happiness, be healthy. It's no different. You stripped away all these barriers like color or like language or like religion or anything else. In the end, I've been to like 97 countries now. And for the most part, everybody wants the same things. We're all just trying to get along. We're trying to take care of our people and our family. And we're trying to just live a good life. And so that's not the way the media or the politicians have ever portrayed it. But when I started going, I remember the first time I ever went deep into Russia or even China, when they were both communists and you weren't even supposed to go there. And I was scared to death because I was kind of sneaking in. And guess what I found? Families trying to raise their kids and do the best they can for them. And I was like, wait a minute, that, the media told me you guys were all the enemies. And in fact, you're just like me. So that was the big learning, but I had to see it for myself.
Sure. It's amazing. So for when I got to ask you, when I asked you, what made you who you are, you told me 2 stories. And the first story was of one of your childhood friends. Would you mind sharing that story of how that shaped how you go about your business and your life?
Yeah. So you're talking about my best friend, Michael, right? When I told you, shared that with you guys. Yeah. So my, Michael, my best friend, when you have somebody, by the way, you don't really think about this, but win or lose in life, well, you think what, Mark, this news reporter one day said to me, she was being like clever. And she said, Jeff, is life about the journey or the destination? So my choices were that life's about the journey or the destination. And I chose neither. I said, neither. It's just about the people you're traveling with. It doesn't actually matter where you're going if you're traveling with the right people. And I said that because what I realized that success is no fun if you have no one to share it with, right? And, failure is really tough unless you have people that put an arm around you and say, it doesn't matter, we still love you anyway. And so that's sort of my best friend, Michael. Having things good or bad, when you have a friend like that to share with, just changed perspective on everything. But Michael had this profound effect on me because he used to do climbing, and he would climb up cliffs literally cliffs, the sides of mountains. And there had been a day where there was a person that freaked out hanging way up high in a cliff. When they climb, they have a hammer and they have stakes and they spike them in, and then they tie themselves and they pull themselves up. And so you're tied to it. But he freaked out and he was stuck on the wall hanging down, and they were afraid that in his panic, he might unhook himself. And so Michael had finished climbing and he had none of his equipment. It was in his car and he was afraid that time was limited. So he scaled the sheer cliff like Spider-Man with no equipment. And it was all over the news. And so Michael got this idea that he would find out what's the world record? What's the highest thing anybody's ever climbed without a rope or any safety equipment, which is an insanely bad idea. But Michael started climbing. And I would pull aside on weekends and I would say, this was our running joke. Can you not climb this weekend? And he would say, why? And I would say, because I'm super busy and I don't have time to plan your funeral. And that was our joke. But one day, Mark, I pulled Michael aside for real. And I said, look, man, I'm not kidding. You're going to fall one day and you're going to kill yourself. Please stop doing this. You're too important to me. And Michael, who was 40 then, said, you know what, Jeff? He said something that just changed my life, Mark. He looked me straight in the eyes and he said, if I had to choose 40 years of living life the way I'm living it versus 90 years of what everybody else is doing, just going through the motions, he said, I'll take the 40. And I was looking at him right in the eyes and I realized, oh my God, he meant that. If you really said, Michael, you can live all out, you can climb, you can chase your dream, do whatever you want to do, but you're only going to have 40 years, or you can have 90 years, but you're just going to plod along through life like so many people do and wake up one day and wonder what you did with it, or all the things you didn't get to. He would have taken the 40. And at 42 years old, he never fell off any of those mountains. But at 42 years old, he drowned in a freak accident in the Irish Sea. And it made me stop because, I had to do the eulogy and at his funeral. I was just sitting there and thinking, what did Michael, deep in his soul, what did he know that he said to me that day, I'll take 40 years of really living. And then we lost him at 42. and Mark, that was life-changing. Because what I realized was what Michael knew was that you can't keep living your life for tomorrow. And you can't assume you're ever going to have that. And, what is that old saying? Life is what happens while you're making other plans, or something like that. And Michael realized that he was going to spend his time on this planet actually doing the things that he wanted to do. I'm not talking about it being irresponsible. I'm talking about not saying, someday I'll work for 65 years, then I'll retire, then I'll climb Mount Everest when neither of my knees or hips work, right? Whatever it is, it just didn't make sense. Michael said this. Michael's lesson to me is, this is your life right now. What exactly were you waiting for, right? Live now. Do things you want to do now. You work around a schedule so you can be a responsible adult, but live. The message was simply this. This is your life. You're actually right in the middle of it. These are the days you're supposed to be doing things that matter to you. And so that's what changed me so much with the loss of Michael, is I realized that my life is happening now. And, that's part of the inspiration for me, even though I'm a tech engineer, leaving in tech and taking a shot at movies and music and television and other things and even sports that I was interested in learning about and trying. I was afraid that if I kept putting them off another year and another year, I might not get another year. Who knows? So Michael's inspiration is what helped me go out and explore a bunch of things I always wanted to learn about in my life.
That's amazing. That's like career rock climbing. I'm going to start from the bottom of something else.
You're exactly right.
And take my, I'm going to put links in the show notes so people can understand some of the stories about how you used your entrepreneurial expertise to start over in other industries. It's really kind of breathtaking. But that story, I put in my 8 things I learned from Jeff Hoffman, and it really helped me because I've had lots of failure and lots of success in my life, up and down, in and out. And I sometimes look back and go, man, did I waste a lot of time? And you said, a successful life is when you look back and go, wow, what a ride. And, I sat there in that, when you said, right after you said that, I was like, oh, I can say that easily tenfold. I have lived a life. In fact, one of my friends even said to me, he was the CIO of a big multinational corporation. He says, Mark, you live more life in 1 month than I have in all 50 years. Like, so that really
Mark,
helped me.
that's so important, because people think that failure is the worst thing. Failure is not the worst thing. The worst thing is never getting off the couch and trying anything. So I remember one time when I had a really bad idea and we failed miserably. And I remember, this is the visual. The visual is, well, so there's this saying that for entrepreneurs, but it really is for everybody just living. But the saying is, being an entrepreneur is like jumping off a cliff and trying to build an airplane on the way down, right? So I spend my life throwing myself off cliffs, and you never know what's going to happen. And when you do that, sometimes you don't have the right parts or the right tools. The airplane doesn't get built, and you crash into the ground. So you're laying there in a pile of blood and broken bones, figuratively. And I remember one of those moments when something we did failed miserably, and turning to Michael and said, I know it hurts really bad right now, but someday this is going to be one hell of a story. So even when you're failing, you got a story to tell. You're living. You were jumping off a cliff while everyone else was safely sitting on the couch doing nothing with no stories to tell. So failure is living, and failure is learning, and failure is adventure. It's a lot better than fear of failure preventing you from ever having any stories to tell one day in your life because you never tried anything. So I'm glad that you see it that way, because that's right. The difference between you and other people was they never tried anything. If you're never failing, it really means you're just not pushing the envelope very far, right? If you're always taking a low risk, one of the things my employees made a painting of and put it on my wall because they kept hearing me say it. Sometimes people would tell me something they were a little concerned about, and I would shrug and I say, hey man, no guts, no glory. So they wrote no guts, no glory on the wall because I kept saying that there's no shot at glory if you don't have the guts to at least try.
I'm still yellow highlighting. Failure is living. Oh my God, that's such a perspective change, and thank you for that. So I want to be cognizant of time. There's one story I need to drag out of you, and by the way, Thank you for the Michael story, because I know this isn't shtick. I know this is your life and people you care about. So thank you for sharing it.
Absolutely.
But you had another story about enough. I got to talk to John Lee Dumas a couple of weeks ago, and he's kind of the poster child for hustle and grind. And like I couldn't deal with him at all. That was just not my thing. I'm in my 50s. He's in the hustle and grind. Cool. And when the guy I met and got to talk to was so grounded and so, in his body and so just wise and different. I said, what's changed? And he said, I knew when I had enough. I had enough. Right? And I'm good. And I was like, damn, at 40 years old, good for him. And you told a story that really cemented that for you about the yacht. And if you would share that, that would be
absolutely.
Really...
Because the importance of knowing when is enough is that there is this sort of default assumption that as long as you're capable of doing another deal, launching another business, and making another dollar, you are therefore obliged to do so. And my argument is that that's insane, and it's a waste of a lot of your life. And I had a very visual example of this, because this guy was one of my first mentors for sure. But mentor, when we talk about mentor, we assume that it's all good lessons. And I'm here to tell you, a mentor can be a bad example too. He taught me a ton of good things about business, and a ton of really valuable things about what not to be when I grew up. And so I'll share that story with you, because I know so many people that never get out of the grind, Mark. They never get out of the rat race. I hit a day where I said, I'm done. I don't want to launch another company. I don't want to be a CEO. I want to focus on the giving back commitments that I made. And so I was just done, even though I could have started another company, could have made another dollar, could have whatever, all these things other people do. But here's the story of how I learned that. So I had this investor and mentor in one of my businesses. And he always talked about his dream of having a big boat and having a boat bigger than anybody's. And I never said a word to that. Everybody's entitled to their own dream. It's not my place to judge him. But his dream centered around having the biggest boat. And so he kept on working and relentlessly round the clock on getting a bigger boat, and then a slightly bigger boat. And along the way, I got to be honest, along the way, he was sacrificing everything. And unfortunately, it's a dark story, but it's a cautionary tale. And sometimes you need those to learn from. And he was alienating everybody because all he wanted to do was work, and all he wanted to do was make more money and get a bigger boat. And I am going to tell you, again, not trying to bring us down here, just trying to share something really real. Along the way, his wife left him. His son, and I'm sorry to say this, his son committed suicide and left a note that said, all you care about is the next boat and the next boat, and you don't care if I'm dead or alive, so there's no reason for me to be alive anymore. And I dearly loved his son. It was devastating. His son was so distraught that he shot, by the way, he put a shotgun in his mouth. He shot both of his German shepherds and left a note, said, nobody should have to live with you because you don't care. I don't want my dogs to starve, so I'm taking them with me and not leaving them with you. His daughter wound up in prison with a drug problem because she was trying to get attention. This is the price. But guess what happened one day, Mark? One day he calls me and he says, Jeff, this is years later, come to Miami. I need you to come to Miami. I was like, man, I got a company to run and I'm busy. I don't have time. Why do you want me? He said, just come to Miami. I said, I really don't want to. And he said, I was there for you, right? Which he was. He was my first investor. I said, you were. He said, then return the favor. I fly to Miami. A car picks me up. The car takes me to the harbor in Miami. And sure enough, I figured out right away, there's one big giant boat that's bigger, a yacht bigger than all the other ones. I'm sure the car takes me right there to the bridge to that boat. And I get on the boat and it's him. He said, see, I did it. And he's given up basically one child and really his whole family, his wife and both children. He's effectively lost, but he got a big boat. And I'm disgusted because I know what the price of it. He's alienated everyone and everything, and his own child committed suicide. And he just wants to brag about the boat. And he makes me get on it. And we start driving around the harbor. And I'm, like I said, pretty disgusted because the exercise here is he keeps pointing down. Look at, I'm bigger. My boat's bigger than that. Look at my boat's the biggest one in the harbor. And look how much smaller that boat is than mine. And I'm like, okay, you made your point, right? You kept going and going and going until now you have the biggest boat. May I please go home? I don't want to be anywhere around any of this. And he finally says, okay, now that you see that I was right and that I got there, we can go home. And all I can think about is the price that he paid and everybody he lost and sacrificed, no friends left. But he got his boat. So we're sailing back in. We get to the harbor and all of a sudden it gets super cloudy and dark. And I said, wow, we made it in just in time because, it suddenly got dark and it's about to rain. And I said, thank God we came back now because it's about to rain. And then all of a sudden, my brain was thinking, wait, how is it about to rain? Minutes ago, I was looking up into the sky and there wasn't a cloud for 100 miles. So how is it suddenly getting dark? And he and I both turned around to look at the sun. At the same time, Mark, and then it happened. We turned around and looked, and there wasn't a cloud behind us. There wasn't weather blocking the sun. There was a yacht that was so freaking big that it blotted out the sun and the entire skyline, and it was above and over us. And we turned and we looked up at this giant boat that dwarfed his. I burst out laughing, and he said, get off the boat. I have to go back to work. And I turned around and I said something that for me became symbolic of a lesson that I'm literally asking all your listeners right now. How big of a boat do you need? And so when I was flying home, I was thinking, Jeff, ask yourself that question. The boat's the metaphor. How big of a boat do you need? And so what I'm asking everybody here is don't wait until you've sacrificed, you've paid a price that you cannot get back. Ask yourself today, how big of a boat do I need? What is your comfort zone? What is going to make you say, like the story you just told about John, say, okay, that's what I wanted. I'm good now, and stop. And only because I asked myself in life, how big of a boat do you need? And mine wasn't that big. What does it take for me to be happy? It's actually not that much. I was just blessed enough that a lot more things happened because the way we structured our businesses than I needed. But when I saw the boat I needed, I quit. One day I said, I'm good. I don't need a bigger boat than this in life. I've already, been blessed with way more than I ever thought I was going to have in my life. And I'm done. And I quit being a CEO and I quit starting companies. And I said, now I can spend the rest of my life doing what's really important to me, which is the philanthropic work we do to give back. So ask yourself that question. How big of a boat do you need? And when you see that boat come in, you're done. Don't spend the rest of your life.
Yeah, find out what that next chapter is. In fact, start thinking about the next chapter now. Uh, thank you for sharing those poignant stories, because
Absolutely,
they're so visceral in their, in the players and the happenings, that it's hard to ignore. And they've stayed with me since, when you first told those, and I'm in tears just listening to them a second time. So it's very powerful. Thank you for doing that.
You bet, my friend.
So you mentioned your philanthropic endeavors. How can our listeners and myself help in any way from here?
Sure, Mark, and I really appreciate that you even asked that. Most of my focus is on youth, and it was interesting because I was blessed enough to spend a day once with the Dalai Lama that I didn't know I was going to spend the day, so I hadn't really thought about what to ask him. So I'm sitting there 2 feet, 2 inches away, right next to him, talking, and I'm trying to think of what to ask, and so I just suddenly said, I'm really focused on trying to make some positive change and leave an impact. Do you have any advice? And he said something pretty fascinating. He said, Jeff, you would think that if you want to change the world, you need to talk to the people running it. And I said, seems logical. You want to change the world, talk to the people that run the world. And he said, but you're wasting your time. They'll never change. He said, let them all die off and spend all your time working with youth. Prepare the next generation to be better leaders than our generation was. So I was feeling that anyway, but when you have the Dalai Lama tell you that, it helped sort of
listen.
Yeah, it really helped sort of clarify for me that I really I spend a lot of time with youth. So probably the single biggest thing we do is we have a children's charity, which is just called World Youth Horizons. It's literally worldyouthhorizons.com. And I will be honest, Mark, I don't go out and I don't go raise money and I don't solicit it. If people want to donate, they're welcome. But I made a commitment to doing this, and I don't actively ask people to help. But people like Brandon and you personally gave money that went directly to feeding, clothing, and providing school opportunities for children in our orphanage in Uganda, Mark. And it was amazing. You literally impacted lives by that.
I got a video with a sign with my name that left me in a puddle. It was absolutely beautiful.
I was called the kids. We have an orphanage in Uganda. We have a school in Ethiopia. We work with kids in the inner city schools in Detroit, in Chicago, in New Jersey, in Jersey City. We do this pretty much all over the world, but that's a children's charity. And we were trying to get clothes, shoes, and school for those kids in Uganda. And at the time you made that donation, you were a hero. So those kids wanted to thank you personally for changing their lives. So that's just worldyouthhorizons.com. If people want to donate like you did, Mark, they're more than welcome. But we're going to take care of these kids around the world anyway, because I think the key is I'm not going to try to change politicians and current leaders, but if we can get to the next generation now and get them to think in a more civil way, in a more accepting and open way, to focus on problem solving, not political backstabbing and complaining, I think they can do a lot better job when it's their turn to run the world than a lot of people in my generation did.
That's so wise. And to come from the Dalai Lama, you just listen.
That was just amazing that he just said that.
We're going to put that in the show notes so that people can just click and donate, and hopefully we can raise a little bit of money. Goes a long way in those types of charities.
It really, really does. And a lot of these young children, when we found them, they're discarded. They're either victims of the internal civil wars in these countries, and when the adults are slaughtered, and one little girl hid under a bed, and they killed the whole family while she watched, but they never saw her, and then she had no one to raise her. So we adopt all these kids. In the orphanage where you sent money, there's 50 kids there that have no parents, and most of them, when we find them, have no clothes, no shoes, no food, and so people like you making a donation literally changes their life, because we can go buy them shoes, clothes, we can feed them, and we can send them to school, which is the best part, because that's the only way they ever have out of there is getting an education. So again, from the bottom of my heart and the behalf of the kids, thank you for doing that.
Jeff, thank you for all you do in the world. Thank you for turning your attention to all the problems that you feel you can make an impact on. I just appreciate your example. I appreciate you taking the time with us and my listeners. And if there's anything we can do for you, anything I can do for you in the future, I am at your disposal, because you have changed my life just by meeting you briefly. So thank you.
Thank you, my friend, and please stay in touch.
Will do. To everybody else, this was a hell of a episode. I appreciate your time and attention more than you know. I love you, and have a great rest of the day.